Hey everyone, it's Kamil Zuzak again. It's week 2, and here's my video. Uh, just a little disclaimer, I was going to make this a mukbang, but I ended up eating all the food before the video started, so there's no food, but if you want to have me to make a mukbang for week 3, please let me know, and Professor, please let me know if that is doable, if I can do that without deduction of points, because I totally will eat on camera and answer questions because I love food, as stated in my prior video. So, the first questions, what terms were most important concepts of this week's lesson? For me, what I found really interesting throughout the whole kind of stuff we were supposed to read was how vulnerable the US is, especially because it kind of hits home because I know Philadelphia almost had like a big disaster with I-95 collapsing when they found a crack on the one of the columns in I-95 when the president was in town. So I-95 was like completely swamped with traffic. So it was supposed to be like a huge disaster, but they ended up finding the crack before I-95 would have collapsed. So it kind of hit home how vulnerable we are, especially with our infrastructure. Also, I found it really interesting how people actually cause more damage than natural disasters themselves, in the way like people kill people, not natural disasters, something along those lines. And really all about how like we build in areas where we really shouldn't build. Like we build on beaches and we build on fault lines and we build on floodplains. It was just really interesting because I never really thought of that. And like if you think about it, like beaches are such prime real estate, but they're also so susceptible to hurricanes, tsunamis, floods. And it's kind of like people put so much money into it, but shouldn't they also expect disasters to come? And it's that kind of stuff kind of confused me, and I was like, wow, like it really made me think. Also, defining a disaster, especially about like something about 100 human deaths, 100 human injuries, and $1 million. That's something that I was like, wow, I never really thought of how someone would define a disaster. I always just thought it was something like, oh, like people were hurt, that was a disaster. I thought it was just something that was subjective. I never really thought of it as being something that could be objectively defined. And finally, the 4 theories of disaster. Something that really caught my attention was how people think of it as like an act of God or an act of nature, because that's honestly like the only way I could explain it as an act of nature. I would have never thought of it as avoidable human construction or an intersection of society and nature. I always thought of it, oh, it's just nature. Like we can't really prepare for something to happen. Like we can always like be alert for it, but you can never like know like, oh, like it's just something that happens. Um, the most muddiest point that I had this week would have to be towards the end with the 4 theories of disaster, because I never really thought about how it was an intersection of society and nature, and how it can be avoided. So it was kind of something new for me. So I was like, oh wow. And especially the culpability, it was something along those lines. It was something, it just really like shocked. It was just something, it was so, how do I put this into words? It was so kind of just raw. I was just like, wow, like I never thought of it that way. So it was kind of muddy for me. But when I started going over it over and over again, I started getting it more. So I kind of answered my own question, but that was like the muddiest part for me. And if I had to lead an in person class on this week's topic, what is one question you would open a class discussion with? I think honestly, I would do it on either the 4 theories of disaster, like I would say something along the lines of, what do you like? Why do you think natural disasters happen? Because I think it's something really interesting to talk about how natural disasters can be avoided if we don't build on floodplains, if we do create good prevention programs, because I do think a lot of people either think it's like an act of God or it's an act of nature. I don't think a lot of people think about the other theories. Or I would open a class discussion being like, what do you think a disaster is? Or do you think how much damage or death do you think comes out of natural disasters? And maybe talk about how people are actually the ones that really cause the most damage. So yeah, that's some of the major things I took away from this week. It was a very interesting week and really eye-opening because I learned a lot through all the slides and all the readings. So yeah, can't wait for next week and have a great week, guys.